it feels like just yesterday we were talking about, the tech sector booming, all those crazy perks,
Yeah.
and everybody, trying to get those top engineers and coders and all that. But
Right.
things have definitely shifted a little bit, it feels like.
Absolutely.
And if you are in the tech world, or even if you're not, but you're just keeping an eye on things, you probably feel that too.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what we're diving into today.
That's right.
So we've pulled some reporting here on, how tech jobs are changing, venture funding, M&A activity, and of course all those, workforce adjustments we keep seeing. So
Yeah.
that's what we're going to take a look at today and see if we can't cut through all that noise.
Yeah.
And figure out what's important for everybody.
That's exactly right. I mean, there's been a lot of changes. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But I think we can get to the bottom of what really matters for folks out there who are either in the industry or just watching it.
Absolutely. And a big thank you to Stonefly for sponsoring this deep dive today.
Absolutely.
Stonefly's been around for over 20 years.
That's right.
Serving customers and really focusing on data resilience.
Yeah, especially in today's world. I mean, data is so important, and it's everywhere, and, you have to make sure it's protected.
Absolutely.
And that's what Stonefly really specializes in, is making sure that, even when things go wrong, and they always do,
right,
you're able to, recover your data, get back on your feet, and keep going.
Absolutely. And they've got a great suite of solutions, including their DR365 with immutable and air-gapped backup, and their DR appliance. So this is especially important, I think, in this climate where there's so much M&A activity.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to make sure your data is protected. So
right.
Yeah, and Stonefly, speaking of solutions, they have a great promo going on right now.
Oh yeah, this is a good one.
They've got a 70 terabyte, expandable up to 4 petabytes, air-gapped and immutable appliance.
Wow.
Complete with Veeam, Rubrik, Commvault, site recovery, backup, and DR capabilities.
Yeah, they've got it all.
They've got it all in there, yeah. And it features their object lockdown technology for ransomware protection.
That's key.
Yeah.
With all the ransomware threats out there.
Absolutely.
You got to be prepared.
You got to be prepared. And this is all for $7,995.
That's a steal.
So that's a pretty good deal.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into what we've got here.
Okay.
And I want to talk a little bit about the tech job market.
Okay, yeah.
And how it shifted. I remember reading all these stories about, on-site masseuses and...
Oh, yeah, the perks.
Gourmet meals delivered to your desk and nap pods and all kinds of crazy things.
Yeah, it was like an arms race, right? To see who could offer the most extravagant, over-the-top perks.
Right, yeah.
Free food, game rooms, you name it.
But, that feels like a lifetime ago now.
Yeah, it does feel like a bygone era.
It does, yeah.
Like the Wild West of tech, right?
Yeah, right. It's like, they found gold and then the gold rush is over. And now it's like,
Wait, right.
Okay, we've got to,
settle down.
Settle back
to
down.
reality. Work, yeah. So what we're seeing now is really a move away from those lavish perks.
Yeah.
Towards maybe some more sustainable benefits, things like flexibility. And
right, more practical things.
Yeah.
That actually help people, in their daily lives.
Right.
Manage their work-life balance.
Right, yeah.
Things like that.
And it makes sense when you think about, all the layoffs that we've been seeing and this larger pool of applicants.
Right. The competition is much more fierce.
Exactly.
For those jobs. So employers, they don't have to offer all those crazy perks anymore.
They don't have to, they don't have to bend over backwards.
Right.
To get people in the door.
Exactly. The dynamics have shifted a little bit.
They have, yeah. I mean, it's still a, desirable industry to work in, but the pendulum has swung a little bit.
Yeah.
Back towards the employer side.
It definitely has. And if you need any proof of that, we've got the Crunchbase Tech Layoffs Tracker, and it's a pretty sobering list.
It is, yeah.
Some big names on there.
Yeah, some household names, some companies that, we all know and use.
Yeah.
Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, Grubhub.
Yeah.
Wayfair. I mean, these are big companies that are, laying off significant portions of their workforce.
Exactly. So this is not just...
It's not just the small startups.
Yeah, this is...
It's across the industry.
Yeah. Big companies, small companies, everybody's kind of feeling the crunch a little bit.
Right. And it's not necessarily just about, individual company performance.
Right.
In some cases, it might be.
Right.
But it's also a reflection of the broader economic environment.
Yeah.
We've seen, interest rates go up.
Right.
Inflation, all of these things are kind of creating this sense of, uncertainty. And so companies are being more cautious.
Absolutely.
And one of the ways they do that is, unfortunately, by reducing their workforce.
Yeah. Now let's move on to something a little bit more optimistic.
Okay.
We're seeing a lot of billion-dollar exits.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Right. IPOs and acquisitions valued at $1 billion or more. And, Crunchbase data shows that there have been 11 U.S. venture-backed companies
Wow.
that have achieved this so far this year, compared to less than half that number
Right.
in the same period last year.
So that's a pretty significant jump.
It is, yeah. So despite some of the bad news, there's still a lot of
Yeah, there's still a lot of activity.
There's still a lot of, deals happening.
Absolutely. And it shows that, investors are still willing to bet on companies that they think have potential.
Right.
And that are, performing well, even in this kind of,
Right.
uncertain economic environment.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of examples
Okay.
that I think really illustrate this. We've got the pending acquisition of the AZEK company by James Hardy for $8.8 billion.
Wow.
And Clearlake Capital Group's acquisition of Dun & Bradstreet for $7.7 billion.
Yeah, these are massive deals.
Huge, huge.
And it really shows you the scale
Yeah.
of, these transactions.
And it makes you wonder, what are they seeing
Right.
in these companies,
Right.
What's so special? What's driving?
What's the secret sauce?
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's interesting to kind of look at that and try to understand, what are the factors that are driving these big acquisitions?
Absolutely. I mean, it could be a number of things.
Yeah.
It could be that, these companies have really strong market positions. They have, great products or services.
Right.
They have, a really talented team.
Right.
It could be that they're in a really hot market.
Right.
That's, growing rapidly. But I think, one of the things that's really interesting is that, we're seeing a lot of these acquisitions happening in the tech space.
Yeah.
And I think that's because, tech is really driving a lot of the innovation and growth in the economy right now.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great segue into our next point, which is, all of this sounds good, right? Billion-dollar exits.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing.
Right.
But there is this potential hidden danger.
Oh, okay.
For startups, which is the overfunding trap.
Yeah, interesting.
And it seems kind of counterintuitive, but raising too much capital too early can actually be a bad thing.
Yeah, that's right.
For a company.
It's kind of like, having too much of a good thing.
Right, right.
It can be tempting to just take all the money that you can get.
Yeah.
But it can actually create some problems down the road.
Yeah, and Sergey Gribov of Flint Capital, he talks about this. He says that one of the main risks of overfunding is that it can lead to an inflated valuation. That's not really supported by the company's fundamentals.
Right. You get this kind of artificial valuation that's not really based on, the actual performance of the company.
Right.
And that can be a problem later on when you go to raise more money.
Exactly. Yeah. You set this precedent of, this high valuation. And then if you don't live up to that.
Right. And investors are going to be like, wait a minute.
Right.
You were valued at this much before what happened.
Yeah. So it's really about finding that sweet spot.
Right.
Where you're raising enough capital to grow.
Yeah.
But not so much that you're setting yourself up for.
Right. You don't want to get ahead of yourself.
Right. Failure. Yeah.
Yeah. It's got to be sustainable growth.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about the pace of these big funding rounds.
Okay.
These 9-figure deals. We're seeing a bit of a slowdown.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So for the second week in a row, it seems like the appetite for these massive investments might be
waning a little bit.
Waning a little bit, yeah.
It's like people are getting a little bit more cautious.
Yeah, taking a breath.
Right, stepping back and saying, okay, let's see what's going on here.
Yeah.
Before we throw another $100 million at this.
Yeah, maybe, 99 million is enough.
Right, exactly.
For now.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting because even though we're seeing the slowdown, there's still a lot of activity.
Right.
So we did see a significant $500 million round close recently.
Wow, that's still a lot of money.
It is, yeah.
So it's not like the money has dried up completely.
No, it's still flowing.
It's just flowing a little bit more carefully.
Right, yeah.
A little bit more strategically.
Yeah, and if you're interested in keeping track of all of this, the Crunchbase Mega Deals board.
That's the place to go.
That's the place to go. Yep.
They've got all the latest on those big deals.
Absolutely. So let's look at some specific examples of some recent funding rounds.
Okay, sounds good.
So we've got the Bot Company.
Okay.
They're developing robotics for household chores.
Interesting.
And they just secured a $150 million venture round.
Wow.
Led by Green Oaks.
So that's a pretty big bet on the future of,
Yeah.
Robots doing our dishes and laundry.
Yeah, folding laundry and making the bed.
Yeah, sign me up for that.
I know, right? Yeah.
So what else do we have?
So we've got Aura.
One.
They closed a $140 million Series G round,
Nice.
led by 1011 Ventures, and they're in the cybersecurity space.
Okay, yeah, that's a hot area right now.
Very hot, yeah. They provide AI-powered solutions for identity theft protection, credit monitoring, online privacy.
Very important.
Yeah, all very important things these days.
Absolutely. With everything moving online.
Right. Exactly.
Got to make sure you're protected.
And then we've got BuildOps.
Correct.
They're a software platform specifically designed for commercial contractors.
Okay.
They raised a $127 million Series C round.
Nice.
Led by Meritech Capital Partners.
So it sounds like, even though we're seeing a little bit of a slowdown in the really big funding rounds,
Yeah.
there's still a lot of money flowing into different areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, robotics, cybersecurity,
Yeah.
construction tech.
Yeah.
So it seems like investors are still, looking for opportunities to put their money to work.
Yeah. Now, we've been talking a lot about acquisitions.
Yeah.
And I think this next point is really important, especially in light of all the cybersecurity threats that we're seeing these days.
Right.
It's the cybersecurity imperative in M&A.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
So what we're seeing in the reporting is that it's absolutely critical to address potential cybersecurity gaps during any merger or acquisition.
Right, because you're essentially combining two different systems.
Exactly. And Snehal Antani of Horizon3.ai,
Okay.
he points out that, if you don't do this, you're really putting yourself at risk.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Because, if the target company has some kind of vulnerability that hasn't been addressed,
Yeah.
and then you merge your systems with theirs,
Yeah.
now you've inherited that vulnerability.
Exactly. And that could lead to a data breach.
Right, which could be catastrophic.
Yeah.
I mean, you could lose sensitive data.
Yeah.
You could damage your reputation.
Yeah.
You could face legal action.
Absolutely. It could be really bad.
Yeah. So it's really important to do your due diligence.
Absolutely.
And make sure that you're not inheriting any cybersecurity risks when you acquire another company.
Yeah, and the article actually has a 4-step guide
Okay.
for conducting a cybersecurity audit
Okay.
of an M&A target.
Yeah, so that's a good resource.
Yeah, and we won't go into the specifics of those steps.
Okay.
But, just the fact that they have this guide
Right.
shows how important it is.
Yeah, it's a must-do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's kind of recap what we've talked about today. So we've seen that the tech job market has become much more competitive. We're seeing a shift away from those lavish perks.
Yeah, the free lunches and the nap pods are a thing of the past.
Yeah, probably. We've also seen a big increase in billion-dollar exits.
Right. So there's still a lot of value being created in the tech space.
Absolutely. And, we've talked about the potential pitfalls of overfunding for startups.
Yeah, you don't want to raise too much money too early.
Right. And we've seen a bit of a moderation in those mega funding rounds. But, there's still a lot of money out there.
Yeah, investors are still looking for good opportunities.
Absolutely. And then finally, we talked about how important it is to address cybersecurity during any M&A.
Right. You don't want to inherit any vulnerabilities.
You don't. It's very, very important.
Absolutely. So overall, it seems like the tech industry is still a pretty dynamic place.
Oh, yeah. It's always changing.
Yeah, you got to stay on your toes
You do.
to keep up with everything that's going on.
Absolutely. And a big thank you again to Stonefly for sponsoring this deep dive today.
Yeah, they're a great company.
They are. And I want to remind everybody, they've been a leader in this industry for over 20 years.
That's right.
They've got their Stonefly DR365 suite with immutable air-gapped backup, the DR appliance, all really important things. And
yeah, especially in today's world.
yeah, they've got that great promotional offer.
Right, the one we talked about earlier.
Yeah, that 70 terabyte to 4 petabyte appliance with, all the features, Veeam, Rubrik, Commvault, site recovery, backup DR capabilities.
It's a really sweet deal.
It is, all for $7,995, so definitely check that out.
Absolutely.
And I think this is a good time to kind of leave our listeners with a thought.
Great.
We've talked about all these trends, funding, acquisitions, cybersecurity. What does all this tell us about where the tech industry is going?
That's a great question.
Yeah, is it going to become more consolidated?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of these big companies acquiring smaller companies.
Oh.
So it's definitely possible.
Yeah, what does that mean for innovation?
Right. Will we see less innovation?
Yeah.
Or will it just shift in a different direction?
Yeah, and what does it mean for competition?
Right. Will we end up with a few big players dominating the market?
Right.
Or will there still be room for smaller companies to emerge and compete?
Lots of questions.
Yeah, a lot to think about.
A lot to think about.
Yeah, but it's exciting times
It is,
to be
yeah.
watching this industry.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to be interesting to see
Yeah,
how it all plays out.
definitely.
So thank you, everybody, for listening to this deep dive today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
We hope you enjoyed it.
We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.